Hello and welcome to another A-Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and I am uber excited tonight. Why am I so excited? Well, Stephen Woodford, Rationality Rules, is obviously a YouTube phenomenon, the likes of which I can only dream of being. But more important than that, I live near a place called Gosport on the south coast, between Portsmouth and Southampton, and we have a brewery that died a death, the Oakleaf Brewery, and it was resurrected in the form of the Fallen Acorn Brew, which is a nice little twist there. And he was involved in designing the logo for that brewery, and this is how I knew that he lived locally to me. So we owe ourselves to have a beer. Stephen, welcome to the show. It's really great that you agreed to do this.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it, and absolutely to the beer. Yeah, you're bringing back some nostalgic memories from my graphic design days.
Good times, although probably better times now, but there you go. So you, before we talk about how you got to where you are now, do you want to just goodness me, people watching this, if they're my viewers, your channel is so much bigger, so everyone's going to know this, but where are you now? Okay, here's a question. What labels would you ascribe to yourself? What do you think are the most important labels for Stephen Woodford now? Maybe 5 labels.
Well, first of all, I'm your fellow ape. I'll take that.
Nice.
Second, I'm happy with atheist, both as a theism kind of approach and also as the positive assertion that there are no gods. I'll take both. I don't mind. And naturalist. I'm happy to take naturalist as well. So they're the labels I tend to go with. And I'll take Steve or Stephen or whatever you want, really. I'm pretty flexible in that regard.
What are your views on, say, being labelled a humanist? Do you think that's important, or is that not how you see yourself?
Yeah, I think humanism's good. There's been some pushback where some people in the atheist community, if you will, have said that humanism is insufficient because it doesn't focus on sentience, which is where they want to push, because consequentialist theory and whatnot is going to be focusing on, well, it's the important thing is whether or not we can perceive pain, and humanism doesn't cover that label. But I'm not too bothered by that. I think you can just say, fine, it's called humanism, but you can extend it out. And I also think if times get hard, then you're always going to focus on your own species, your own tribe, before you can extend it out. So I'm happy with humanism as well. Yeah.
I spoke to Joe Schmidt last week. I had an interview with him, and I know you've collaborated with him on your fantastic Kalam videos that are an ongoing process. I suggest everyone go and check them out. They're brilliant. And we talked a little bit about definitions of atheism. You mentioned the difference between negative and positive atheism there, the idea that some people ascribe to a lack of belief in a god or gods. I would go for strong atheism or positive atheism, which is the belief that God does not exist. Do you have any thoughts on that discussion?
I just think that it's perfectly fine to have both. Take theory. I think that's a good analogy here, or a good example that has the same kind of stress on it. Creationists and people that don't really know much about science, they will equate theory. They will insist that you use theory in a certain way. But at the end of the day, you can use it as, hey, I have a hunch, which is what we might say if we're having a pint. Here's my theory kind of thing. Now, you and I might not do that because we're aware of this stuff, but like the average person will. But also we can use it in the scientific sense. You know, here's an explanation that's got evidence in its favor and it's made accurate predictions. I think that you can have multiple definitions, and the same is true for atheism. For the vast majority of people, when they say they're an atheist, they are simply saying that they're not convinced by any of the arguments for God's existence, or at least that even if they are convinced by some of them, it's just broadly they're like, no, I'm not. That's not the explanation that I go towards. It's not theism. It's more of an atheism kind of push. Whereas in philosophy, which is probably why you go for the more hard definition, it doesn't really make sense to define something as a epistemic state. You're going to want some kind of like tangible proposition involved. And so it tends to get defined as the view that there is no God. And I'm perfectly fine with that. So yeah, just meet people where they're at, basically. I will quickly just say one more thing. The problem is when people try and use this language to gatekeep or to like hit people. So this happens quite a lot with theists and apologetics on particularly YouTube. They will force people that are actually just atheists in the sense that they're not convinced that God exists. They will say, you have to take the philosophical definition, and they bash them with it. And it's just completely pointless, but that's what they do.
My view is more of a practical view, really. Like, if you're going to spend, so most of the atheists I speak to are people like you and I, or if they don't have their own YouTube channel, they're watching them all day and arguing with people online. So if you are going to argue to toss about something all day, every day, and it's like what drives you in your interests, then actually I see you as being someone who ascribes to the position that God does not exist. That really positive, like, I believe God does not exist, and that's why I'm arguing with you. If it's like I lack a belief, like I wouldn't be doing all of this stuff if I just lacked a belief. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, it's a kind of like a practical thing.
That's interesting. So suppose that someone's not convinced by any of the arguments for theism, and the reason they're interacting is because theists are claiming jurisdiction over their experience. Under what you've described there, would you say that they have to be asserting positive atheism, or could they still be in the lack theist disposition there?
I don't. Again, like yourself, like you can say whatever labels you want, as long as when you're communicating with people, both people are operating in the understanding of the same language, right, or the same understanding of the language, and so therefore, you know, just be clear with what you believe and why you believe it, and then come to some agreement that's useful, practical. So I think it's a pragmatic thing, but I just think that if you feel that strongly about it, you are probably assenting to the proposition that God does not exist.
That's interesting. I think I disagree with that. So obviously now we have to have a fight. We can't talk to each other ever again. You know how it works.
I'm going to cancel you. I'm going to cancel you. But let's move aside from that. That's just a little rabbit hole that we could return to at one point.
Absolutely.
You are a big time atheist, right? As a YouTuber, but you're also British, and in Britain, no one particularly cares about religion. I'm speaking mass generalities here. Whereas in America, you know, there's a big appetite for this whole discussion in a way that doesn't so much pop up in general public discourse in the UK. None of our politicians mention religion particularly, no matter where they stand. So what drew you to, what's your description of your formative years and how you arrived at where you're at now?
Oh, okay. So do you want where I started and how I got into this? Or...
Let's do it.
Okay, sure. So I had a bit of a rough upbringing. So I was bouncing around in unofficial foster care. My sister unfortunately died just before she was born. So it was like a week or two out from being born. And I was bouncing around, living with different people. It's very, very disruptive for a young person. I mean, the studies show quite clearly it's not good. You end up getting, unfortunately, empirically bad results if you do that with human beings. Fortunately, I seem to be all right. I'm sure some theists would disagree, but you know, I think I'm doing okay. Unless I'm going to hell forever, then I've probably ballsed up the biggest that you can. And yeah, I've been asking existential questions from the very get-go. Like, you know, why is it my friends get food on the table and I don't? Why is it my mum is always drunk and you know, everyone seems to be having a better time? What did I do wrong? Did I have a life before where I was a bad person? Is this how it, like, I was asking just really fierce questions like that from the get-go, which is a great way to make friends, I'll have you know, when they just want to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon.
But can I sorry to interrupt you, but like, there sounds like there's little elements of just world theory in there, which just world theory is the disposition that so many of us have, which is the world is surely fair, right? So then, and this is maybe explains how the development of heaven and hell came to, certainly in Christianity, which is why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? So were you a boy that was like, I'm a good person, surely I'm a good person, we all think we're good, why is bad stuff happening to me? Was that just world theory maybe manifesting itself?
Yeah, so where I was so young, a lot of the processing, it's like, in hindsight, I can figure out what I was thinking and what I was doing. But at the time, you're just more on autopilot, and you just can't make sense of the world in the sense of like, why is this happening? Why am I around abusive people and they're not? Like, what's going on? Like, why is this the case? Of course, as I got older, I realized that there is theodicies that can deal with that. So because it was human based, they could appeal to libertarian free will, and that would make sense of the evil there. So, there are answers, and the point is just that from a very young age, I started asking those questions. But one of the big questions that I asked was to a vicar at the school. I think it was a vicar. It's hard to remember. I was about 8. And I said to him, "Why did my sister die?" And his answer was, as I still think it is, even more today, of course, because I've been studying this for quite some time, absolute nonsense. It was a theodicy of the greater good, which I just think is just so ludicrously absurd. Like, only someone would defend that if they've completely got a conclusion in their head, because then they get to look at mass extinctions, where libertarian free will is not going to play a part, and they can somehow say, no, that's for the greater good. The Holocaust, no, it's for the greater good. Somehow that's the equivalent of, someone pulling a tooth. But don't worry, God's not using those as a means to an end. No. Like, this is all for the greater good. So yeah, just from earlier on, I was asking these big questions. And because I live in a Christian culture, or at least that's the prominent religion, those are the kind of answers I was receiving, Christian answers. And yeah, just straight from the get-go, I was like, no, this sounds like absolute nonsense. But my journey did actually take a turn where, as I started studying it, I started increasing my credence for theism, including Christianity. But then as I studied more and more, it's dropped off a cliff. It's near zero at this point for Christianity for me.
So, okay, do you think in studying everything, do you think you have become, I don't want to say more dogmatic, but more sure of your position of atheism, or certainly non-theism than you ever were? Like, do you see this as a one-way ticket? Well, not, yeah, one direction that you're going in?
Kind of. Like, I'm very much open to the fact that my views are going to just change over time. But as we know with humans in general, as they think these things through, it becomes less likely that they're going to change their mind. And that's not necessarily because they become stubborn, but it's because they've thought about these propositions and they have this rigid framework in place. Like, I can make sense of that because I hold this view, or, I'm not going to buy that argument because, I've already bought this proposition. Like, you've got all of these things that weigh up, and the more you think about things, the harder it is to move people on topics. So for me, as I studied theism, my credence went up, and then just now it's about as low as it's ever been. It's incredibly low, specifically for the Abrahamic God. We'll see what happens with time. Like, the main lesson I've learned from everything that I've learned is that I know nothing, and that neither does anyone else, in the sense of, you can get people to spend their entire time getting an expertise in a certain subject, and someone who's done equal time is going to disagree with them on really crucial propositions. And one of the lessons, if there is a lesson to be learned, is to have an ego death and just face the fact that there's just a lot that we can't know for sure. And I got there a while back, and I'm comfortable with it now. It's fine.
Yeah, like garbage in, garbage out. You're going to have people that once you start putting some of these foundational bricks in incorrectly, you can end up doing a whole lifetime's worth of research and just be epistemic opposite to someone else. And it's just, or at least, in terms of your knowledge base. And can I just say thank you? Thanks already. Abel Medina, sup, Stephen? Obviously, someone that knows you. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Abel. That's really, really kind. And Chimbaloo, who's a member, and you can join the membership here and become a member of this growing community, not quite at the level of Stephen's, obviously. Thanks for bringing Stephen for your discussion. He is great at presenting his views. I will let you atheists continue this great discussion so far. So Chindies is a great member of the channel. He's a theist, but recognises the challenge, really honest theist, and the kind of one that I always talk about how wonderful he is in sort of expressing doubts, and I suppose that kind of feeds into what you're saying. So you're very sure of where you are now. When was the first time, when you were a child or growing up, adolescent, however old you were, that you started thinking, I'm an atheist? What is an atheist? What is God? And playing with those ideas more explicitly.
Yeah, great question. And I love that you've got a theist. One thing that lacks from quite a few atheists is having theist friends. I love my theist friends. Forgive this, they don't like it when I say it, but I think you love the Christian, hate Christianity. Like, I think that's just the way to operate. So yeah, having theist friends is a great thing. So to your question, if you take atheism as lack theism, I got there quite quick, of course, because I just thought, no, none of these are doing anything for me. And that's the end of the story, really. And what's strange is that theists, at least those that buy Abrahamic religion, they're perfectly fine with this modus operandi when it comes to, say, reincarnation. Like, you give me a theist, they're going to tell you in general, well, I should say monotheist, they're going to tell you that they don't believe in reincarnation is false. Have any of them studied the Vedas? Have any of them actually put in a tremendous amount of time to understand the arguments for reincarnation? Do they have like a rigid, actual, decent argument for, capital R or capital A reincarnationism? They don't. They're perfectly fine with just saying, I'm not convinced by it. But they almost want to insist many times that atheism does have this kind of burden. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't. So in the lack theism kind of sense, I got there pretty quick. I probably was an atheist, I'd say. I was leaning towards atheism from the age of 8. Ever since I've been able to think, I've been leaning quite close to atheism. But specifically learning about evolution by natural selection, that was a paradigm shift and a half. Like, that was just like, wow, this explains so much about the world, so much about, well, all of the perceived evil, the gratuitous evil of it all, and it just clicked. So I'd say that that's when I went to atheism in that sense. However, atheism in the sense of there are no gods, that takes work, because let's break down what religion is. It's going to give you your ontology, it's going to give you your epistemology, it's going to give you your morals, it's going to give you a complete framework. And when you lose that, or if you don't have that, all of a sudden you have to start asking questions about epistemology, which philosophers are all over the place with, asking questions about morality, which philosophers are all over the place with, asking questions about ontology, which again, philosophers are all over the place with. And it takes work. You really have to know a lot until you can get to the point where you can comfortably have a view such as naturalism, which is essentially akin to atheism.
That's such a good point, because, and I was speaking about this recently with someone, that what religion does for you is it does a lot of thinking for you, and what your religious the people in your religious elders, if you like, your pastors or your vicars or whatever, they do the thinking for you and tell you what to think and believe on a Sunday, and in Bible class and all that kind of stuff. And actually, so we laud in this community free thinking, right? We say it's great to be a free thinker, but the truth is, free thinking is really hard. Yeah, because no one tells you what to think. Well, people do, but the ideal is you do the thinking yourself, which means you have to do the learning yourself, which means you have to put in a shed load of time and effort into being a free thinker. And certain religious people don't do that. And so the idea is that actually there's an awful lot of people that are really happy to be told what to believe. Well, what do you say to that?
Yeah, being told what to believe is great, especially if the story that you're being told has you as a main piece, or it has an outcome for you that's brilliant. That's one of the things that religion gives you, right? Craig has recently been expressing this. He's expressed it lots, and lots of religious people do in general. If Christianity is true, good news. You really mean something. You're made in the image of God, no less. And you're going to go to heaven, because everyone thinks they're going to heaven. You're going to go to heaven and have this eternal, just wonderful experience. Like, it's brilliant news. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? Whereas, yeah, that's just not what atheism is going to give you. So I think that feeds into your question quite a bit.
I think heaven and hell and the afterlife in general are literally the core reason Christianity and the largest religions exist. So when you look at Judaism, that doesn't really have a big afterlife tradition, actually Judaism is a very tiny religion. People don't think it is because they think it's one of the great monotheism. But actually, relatively speaking, hardly anyone is Jewish. Globally, the big ones are big on your afterlife. And I think if you took the afterlife away from your major religions, then you just wouldn't have those religions. They would cease to have adherents. It's all about afterlife management. Is that something that you would agree with?
I'd say this is one of the places where my views have changed quite a bit. So I do agree, but I also would extend it out. So if I'm not mistaken, that's like a Freudian approach of saying that religion is death denial. And yeah, religion is death denial. Like, it's, in my opinion, you're not really grieving because you think you're going to see them again. That's another reason, by the way, that you have for not actually looking into other worldviews and not actually taking atheism seriously, because you might not have grieved properly. Like, there's lots of like psychological work that has to be done if you do give up on your religious views there. So that's the first angle. Do you mind repeating your question? I had a
I was just saying. So is religion all about afterlife management? Is it
Brilliant.
about
So I actually think that religion is, so one of the biggest changes I've went through, and it feels like losing a religion, is I've went from moral realism to very, very close, if not entirely, into moral anti-realism.
Welcome to the dark side, my friend.
Thank you, my dude. Emerson Green will be very unhappy. So
he's a good man, though.
He's a lovely man. I've been watching him eagerly. He's going to go places. I'm looking forward to seeing it as well. So when it comes to, say, snakes come up a lot in religion. The Garden of Eden, right? It's a talking snake. If you look at Celtic religion in Britain, snakes are what are found. And yet snakes really don't have much of a presence here. And if you're looking for like a deadly species, why not choose bees? Because more people die from bees than they do from snakes. So it's not like rationally enshrined in this sense. Or take the Norse religion. Why is the world serpent, Jörmungandr? I probably mispronounced that. I'm always told I am. But why is that a snake? What is this frozen wasteland of a place doing, having as its leviathan a snake? Like, they're just not. They don't have snakes like that. And I think the answer is that we evolved on the plains of Africa, and snakes have been one of our predators for millions and millions and millions of years. And so, like, there's something of an archetype that's etched into us. And I think that religions are quite clever, and they do hold wisdom in the sense that they take this knowledge and they weave it into a narrative that can make sense for us. So Jesus is about it's about sacrifice. And sacrifice is incredibly important for a social species. If bees have a religion, then I promise you they've got a Jesus, because sacrifice is what it's all about for bees. I will give myself, my entire self, for the hive. I'll kill myself for it because that's what's needed. And of course, Richard Dawkins with the selfish gene makes a lot of sense of this, because he explains that I don't need to survive myself in order for my species to succeed. I need to just make sure my species succeed. I don't have to be the one that's reproducing. And so I think religion taps into that a lot. And if you start looking at, say, Ramadan, if you look at different religious institutions, communion, if you look at them and you start taking that sociological approach, you can make a lot more sense of it. And I'd argue that it's important. So if we do move forward, hopefully we will, and we start cultivating an environment where atheism is flourishing, I actually do think that you're going to need rituals. You're going to need something, but you don't have to enshrine it in tradition that's going to maintain bigotry and stuff like that. Like, I really do think that we can do this. It's going to take work.
Well, you've kind of jumped to a question I was going to ask you later, which was, in a post-God society, which kind of we're moving towards, right? But what do you think will be the big benefits of living in a non-religious society, and what do you think at the same time? What do you think we might lose by that, if anything? And can I just say before you answer that, thank you, Abel. Sup, Abel, awesome source, and a big thank you to both of y'all for what you do. Thank you, Shadow Vein. 666 is always a worthy contribution. So thank you. So what do you think a post-God society will benefit us? How?
Less bigotry, because the big problem with religion is that it's dogmatic. It's so strange because it's very obvious that religion has changed over the years. Like Christianity, you read the works of Aquinas or Augustine, these people are horrendously misogynistic. They're homophobic, like they endorse slavery, and the apologetics that's put across today, the narrative that's put across today, very successfully, I'll add, is the notion that we've had this religion for 2,000 years and it's not changed. And it's like, that's bullshit. Like, it has changed. It's completely developed over the time. But despite that, because that narrative is important, because of course they want to preach that God has objective moral laws, etc., we're in this situation where religion is very rigid and it doesn't want to adapt to new discoveries. So, for example, it doesn't want to accept homosexuals. It doesn't want to accept trans people. It doesn't want to have a conversation about abortion. It doesn't want to like have this progress, these difficult conversations. And they are, well, particularly abortion, that's a difficult conversation. If you didn't have religion, it could be argued that it would be easier to navigate through these spaces. But with that said, one of the things I've learned throughout the years is that the problems with religion you'll find in every human group. The problem is dogmatism. It's just religion treats it as if it's a feature, whereas other groups kind of recognize it as a bug, but like ignore it. So, yeah.
Interesting. And do you think we'd lose anything by losing religion outright?
If we're careful about it, no. If we're not careful about it, yes. And I think that this is where some of the fears come from with certain demographics and people. So if we take the rationalist approach and just say we don't need religion, it's just absolute nonsense stories, let's get on with our life, I just don't think that we'll be recognizing what's missing. Like, if we're going to take it apart, and we absolutely should, we should be delicate about it, and we should pay it respect in the sense of trying to recognize what it's achieving and what it's doing. So take the community aspects, take Ramadan again. Ramadan is an incredibly cohesive ritual. So you've got Muhammad going across the Arabian Peninsula, conquering all these different places. What's his next job? He needs to unite them. So he comes up with this shared experience of not being able to eat or drink during the day, and then you enjoy that food and water and that ritual together in the mosques. I'm not saying that we should do things like that, but I'm saying that there's something to be said about social species, and that's a cool practice. There's a way that you could take that and you could turn it into a secular representation where you're respecting your roots. You don't think it's true, like a lot of Jews do this. You don't think that it's true. It's just that, culturally, you're a Muslim, for example. I think that the right way to go around these things is to do that, because there is a religious bone in the body, if you will. There is this need for society to function along these different. It's hard to explain, but I think I've made the point. Tell me if I haven't, but I think that's the
yeah. So this sounds very much like a sort of Alain de Botton wrote a book, Atheism 2.0. The Sunday Assembly came along, which is to say that, hey, these are some elements of ritualistic religion that we like, so let's keep that. So let's meet with like-minded people on a Sunday and let's sing songs and get happy about stuff. And then you have I consulted on a book called The Problem with God, James Lindsay's book, that he is a psychology of religion, which is to say that, okay, God exists, but God exists as a function. So if we're going to move to a post-God world, then we need to understand what functions it is that God provides, or God belief provides. So is it about attribution? I don't understand this, therefore God, the kind of God did it. Is it morality? Does it underpin morality for certain people? Is it the comfort blanket dealing with terror management theory and the mortality settings, which is the fear of death, basically, and how I deal with that? All those things are the functions that God belief can provide. And so we either get rid of those functions, say we don't need that, actually that's just a hack, leftover from evolution, or we need to provide that function in a better, more secular way. So I'm broadly agreeing with you.
Yeah.
by talking a lot. So sorry.
No, it's good.
So you mentioned earlier about sort of surveying different religious texts. I have this problem, and it's the same. You can say the same for atheists. But again, I guess the burden of proof isn't on atheists. So you get religious people saying, "Oh, this is my religion. I really know Christianity really well. I've really read the Bible." Yeah, but have you read all the holy books? No one sits down, right, and reads like the Cambridge, the dictionary, a Blackwell's Guide to Natural Theology, right, and all these big books on different philosophies, and then reads all the holy books, and then reads all the atheistic philosophy books, and then does all of that, and then says, "Now I'm ready to believe what is the most appropriate thing to believe."
Yeah.
Well, how I guess so. How do you think we should go about like arriving at it's a huge question, at the correct worldview?
That is a huge question. Well, first of all, I think that we all do that. So I don't think it's a uniquely religious thing. I think we all do it on politics. We basically lean on our intuitions, and the worldview that we've been presented with, and then you look for confirmation. It's completely backward, and it's exactly what you would expect to see from a species that is very, very close to chimps. Darwin said that we'll always bear the lowly stamp of our origin. Well, unless we alter our genes, he's probably correct. So I do think that that's the way that people function in general. The best way to do it is to just... It's very hard. I think basically getting people to recognize that their intuition only gets them so far. So there's been a recent documentary on the Kalam Cosmological Argument from Skydive Phil, which I'm sure most of my audience, potentially most of your audience, has seen it. And one of the things that's expressed several times throughout that by the scientists is you have to just recognize that your intuition is essentially worthless when it comes to applying it to things such as, what time is, or like the nature of causation. It's pointless. Like your intuition's not good for figuring out whether or not we're on a sphere. Your intuition tells you straight up that it's flat. Your intuition tells you that you've got libertarian free will. Anyone that studies it that's not a theist tends to come out on either compatibilism or hard determinism. Like intuition tells you that, this mouse of mine is solid. It's not. It's predominantly just nothing. Like intuition is not a pathway to truth. So getting people to recognize that will make it so that they have to go back to step one and figure out, okay, do I just work with whatever my culture has given me? And the problem is it's just so imbued in psychology. It's, if you've been given this wonderful story where you're going to heaven and you're going to see your cat again and like whatever, people just don't want to change their mind on something like that. It's not appealing to have a kind of conversation. So I've almost got to the point where I just want to get them to stop putting their finger into the pot of politics and, dictating who people can sleep with and abortion rights and whatnot. If you can get that, then that's probably the best you're going to get.
I guess so. The biases. I remember editing a book where one of the chapters was by Dr. Caleb Lack, who's going through all the biases and heuristics that we have, and saying the best we can do, because we can't get rid of them. We're all victim to these biases. Confirmation bias, as you mentioned, is a huge one. So as long as you're aware of them, you can try to mitigate them, but you're never going to be free of them completely. So I guess for you then, what do you ever think that you are just confirming your biases? I think this all the time, like as I'm reading stuff and writing books and thinking, am I really taking a balanced approach here? Am I really reading the other side of the story? Am I giving it enough credence? Or am I just already evaluating that as crap and then here are the better arguments because these confirm my opinion? So how do you deal with it yourself?
I'm in a position where there's like a self-corrective system in place. Because if I make a mistake on something, I'm going to know about it. In fact, if I make a mistake severe enough, then theists, apologists will just take me to the, to the cleaners. They make videos about it and whatnot. And so because of that, I have to know what I'm talking about. So one of the reasons that my production's a little bit slow is that I really want to make sure that I know what I'm talking about before I publish. I ask people to verify it, experts in the field and whatnot. So I have that as a measure to help me make sure that if I do talk about something, I've got a decent foothold. And in general, because I want to know what's true and I want to have meaningful conversations with my theist friends, I need to really understand where they're coming from. And so you're not going to achieve that if you don't take their views as seriously as they do. It's a bit like if someone wants to talk about atheism and then they insist that atheism believes the universe came here for no reason whatsoever. It's just like, mate, get lost. You're wasting my time. And that's going to be exactly the same for those I'm actually trying to reach. If I can't accurately present their views, it's just not going to land. And so
I guess that's why
people
like Joe Smith and you mentioned Emerson Green, these two young minds who are in this YouTube community that we're a part of. Well, you particularly, me, I'm just a hanger on. But Joe Smith is someone who is such a young mind, but so knowledgeable, and yet will give so much time to both sides of the argument, which is hence why he's, partly because he's an agnostic. But and this super chat is actually incredibly on point here, because this is exactly what we're talking about, which is intuition. So what does Stephen Wood, and thank you so much, David, by the way, David Rivera, this is really, really generous of you. And I'll explain this question for the viewers. What does Stephen Woodford think about phenomenal conservatism proposed by Michael Humer? So phenomenal conservatism, for those who don't know, is this idea that your intuitions, which are how things seem to be, after rational, it's not just a gut feeling out of nowhere, but a proper philosophical seeming, how things seem to be. You should believe how things seem to be, absent of any defeaters, right? So if you don't have any defeaters for your seeming of the conclusion based on seeming, then you are justified in adhering to your intuitions. So my words aren't very good. I've got multiple sclerosis, which never helps my word choices. But Stephen, how do you see phenomenal conservatism? Is it something you thought about?
Great question. It's not an area that I have given significant time to be able to give you a very informed view. So, take what I say with salt. But Michael Humer was recently on with Emerson Green. They had a conversation about this topic. And also he had a debate with someone on Joe Schmid's channel. I forget his name. If you remember his name, then do plug it.
Don about moral realism. Don someone.
Yeah, that's the one. So I've listened to it quite a bit. Michael Humer is a brilliant philosopher. His work's excellent. I've really enjoyed it. And as I said earlier, philosophers just disagree on all sorts of things. But if you want to find an area where philosophers are all over the damn place, it's moral realism. It's morality in general. If you just take moral realism and variations of that, you're going to have various branches of different types of it. And I think they're consistent stories and whatnot. But I think intuition's weak. And I think that some of the things that Michael says reminds me eerily of what Craig says about intuition in general. So I don't think intuition's very useful. But I do think that if you don't have a defeater, then you are justified in that view. So before we had a defeater of the Earth being a sphere, we had reason to think that it's flat. Like your intuition tells you it's flat. The problem is that I think if you take all the societies today and you look at how dramatically they view very vital things in society, such as the place of women, such as homosexual rights, such as trans people, such as classes and whatnot, I think that that's a really serious defeater that's presented towards any kind of moral realism, especially when you look historically at how it's all changed with slavery and all the rest of it. I think that this is a really serious defeater that unfortunately just isn't easily dealt with, because the view could be, for instance, that there's some Platonic form out there for it. I know Michael wouldn't bark down this route, but you could have this view that there is a form of objective morality, and that if something is not working towards that, then it's just not in unison with that. It's just wrong. But I'm not articulating myself very well. Perhaps I'll make a video at some point. but it's in an unfalsifiable situation. It's like any observation we make. This tribe over here is literally making sacrifices, 10,000 people a year. Like, how do you make sense of that with your moral framework? Oh, they're just not living up to, what is objectively the case. It's just any data can be just like thrown away like that. Whereas I just think that anti-realism makes a lot of sense of it, especially when you couple it with evolution by natural selection. It just makes sense of why things are that way. But just to put across the T's and dot the I's, again, I haven't studied enough on phenomenal conservatism, and I absolutely full on see that Michael Huemer is far more informed on this topic than myself.
So if anyone's interested, I've written a piece on Only Sky. So I write for Only Sky. It's a non-religious media organization. And I wrote a piece recently on phenomenal conservatism. It seems like suffering is gratuitous. So here is where I think phenomenal conservatism holds, which is the intuition that when you see like tsunamis killing 230,000 people, and when you see a 6-month-old child die of cancer, it seems like that suffering is gratuitous. There is no good reason for that to exist. Now, theists come back and say, but there could be a reason. Yeah, but there could be unicorns. I don't believe there are. So that's not defeater. Just saying there could be a reason that suffering exists is not a good enough defeater for me, at any rate, to say that is gratuitous suffering. So, and it's a bit more complicated than that, and whatever. But in the terms of skeptical theism and the problem of evil, I think phenomenal conservatism is a really useful tool.
I see. Yeah, when it's applied like that. Okay, I may have misunderstood the question. So yeah,
I mean, it can be applied however. I guess. Yeah. In general terms, but I think as with anything, it's like, okay, let's apply it here, let's apply it there.
Well, funny enough, like where I was just saying that basically any data can be described by a lot of moral realist positions because their positions basically have made it so that any data can be understood. That's the same problem with like the greater good theodicy. They can just look at anything and just go, yeah, it's probably for the greater good. You can't show that it's not for the greater good. And it's like, damn, that's a hell of a bite that you're taking there. Yeah. Like, wow, really? Like this entire extinction event was for the greater good. Really?
And the problem with that approach as well is that you can let's do a reductio ad absurdum, which is take it to the most absurd extreme, which is, okay, Stephen, you are the last person on earth. Your entire family has been tortured by a monster over like 100 years. Your family, they've been allowed to live longer and tortured for longer. And then you see the entirety of humanity tortured in front of you. And you are the last person, and you're tortured for 1,000 years by this monster. You could still say, there could be a God, there could be omni-God, this could still be a God, this could all be happening for the greater good. It's not logically inconsistent. And you're like, correct. Well, if you want to believe that, good luck.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really makes it it's just completely, it's bonkers in any case, but the thing that really does it is that most Christians and Muslims believe that hell is an eternal place of torment and that you have to believe in a certain proposition to get to heaven. So the idea that like you have to look at that and actually buy that somehow okay, that somehow that is actually within the plans of an all-powerful loving God, and if you don't, because it might lead you, and it will lead you probably to saying that God doesn't exist, you're going to receive eternal torment. You couldn't make this up. Like, I'll take this seriously because people take it seriously, but like, frankly, this is insane. Like, just insane.
This leads me perfectly on to the next question. And just before I do, I'm going to spam my recent book, my latest book, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan and Divine Design, because I talk about a load of the stuff that we've just been talking about, but also what I'm sure Stephen is going to talk about now. So what do you think are the strongest arguments against God? And I think I heard you say the other day on the video that hell is just bonkers, and you've just been kind of expressing that there. And perhaps that's going to be one of your points. But what do you think are the strongest atheistic arguments?
Okay, so strongest atheist arguments. A lot of them are going to be basically expressions of the problem of evil, because you're going to assume, first of all, it depends on what you mean by God. So if we assume God to be all powerful, all loving, and all knowing, then you're going to, then you can do problem of evil kind of stuff, such as what we were just saying there. Like, these are good arguments. You could do that with the logical problem of evil, or you could do that with evidential problems of evil. I'm sure you've got both of those in your book, so plug it again.
Damn straight. 30 arguments against the existence of God.
Get in there.
But yeah, I mean, the problem of evil arguments are so powerful because they're so emotive, and you can see you can see pain and suffering in front of you and feel it yourself.
Yeah, precisely. So I think that that's where various routes are going to go down to. It has been said before that basically all arguments for atheism are going to basically be problems of evil. I don't think that's true. So one of them that comes to mind is a Graham Oppy approach, where you can just bring up the two theories of atheism, theism, see which of them gives you greater explanatory depth or virtue for how much it gets you to commit yourself ontologically to certain things about the world. So atheism doesn't, for example, say that you must believe that minds can exist without a body. It doesn't commit you to an all-powerful, all-loving God and thus get all these different like weird situations of what the hell's going on here? How do we make this work? And yet it does an explanatory job that's arguably better than theism because of like it doesn't have those tethers. So that's one approach where you can just compare the theories, as Oppy would say. I think that that's a really good approach.
Which is the abductive approach, which is the inference to the best explanation. Both, and you can see that both ways, which is which hypothesis of these two better explains the data. But you can also say, when you start with these hypotheses, what does it predict? So, for example, you can say, what if you just started with the omni-God, right, all loving, all blah 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 God? What universe would I predict, and is it the universe I'm seeing? So you can look at it both ways. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's a really good example. Like one that comes to mind. I should probably come up with a different example, but it just blows my mind. If you had an all-powerful, all-loving God, would you expect for you and I, we've got white skin. Would you expect for that to have come about via our ancestors living in such a way that they literally couldn't pass on nutrition to those that had too much melanin in the skin as they were migrating out of Africa? Like, goodness me, that is horrendous. Now, evolution's beautiful. It's an interesting thing to look at, but if you just look at it in terms of what it necessitates in terms of what is so obviously gratuitous evil and injustice, you would never predict that under theism. And so I think there's a reason why theists, such as those in the Bible Belt, really do not want evolution by natural selection in their toolkit. It's going to really cause them problems.
Someone said on one of my videos a month ago or so, and I thought this was so brilliant, or it might have been on Myth Vision when I was interviewed there, but the sun, right? Would you predict that the sun, which is the thing that gives us, kind of happiness, but power and energy, so would you predict that the sun would give us cancer? Like that thing that's up there, that if we get too much of it, we're going to die. It's like, why would you do that? What? And this is the thing about these two hypotheses, like you're talking about, the abductive, inference is the best explanation, which is you have to explain everything. And that means everything. Like, why did I stub my toe? Why did the sun give me cancer? Why is there plate tectonics? All of that needs explaining on atheism or theism. And what does the best job? And for theism to do the best job, as you said so rightly, you have to have all these add-ons. And it gets so confusing and complex that you're like, well...
Yep. So like you take like the sun example that you just gave, theists might explain that by saying, well, we've inherited sin and like we were in a perfect form, but we're no longer. And this is why we get birth defects. This is why this happens. Is why lots of different parasites exist. They can tell a consistent story, but they're committing themselves to more and more and more baggage. And the beauty, the elegance of atheism, positive atheism, is to simply... You come up with this big problem. You go, okay, there's lots of gratuitous evil. How do you explain this? Atheism is just going to go, bro, the universe doesn't care about you. It's indifferent. It's up to you to look after yourself. And it's heartless, but it's also just doesn't come with any of these problems. So on that front, atheism just wins and wins and wins and wins. And the other thing, just while it's in my head, is that atheism has been vindicated again and again and again and again and again. So an example, back in Paley's time, we're looking, actually, David Hume had already figured out that this was nonsense, but still, Paley and most people back then would look at like the complexity of the human eye, of, you know, like everything that we have, and just say, this has to have been designed by a god. So theism, leaning on intuition again, so another problem with intuition, leaning on the intuition, and the false analogy, it's got this really decent explanatory value for why we are complex and why we have this stuff going on. It can't make sense of, you know, some of the birth defects unless you buy all that extra ontological baggage, but it has an explanation, whereas atheism has nothing. What happens down the line? You've got Darwin, and like he just goes, here's a story. By the way, it's compatible with theism as well, but you're just gonna have to buy more ontological baggage down the road, such as somehow evolution was the best possible world. Like that's actually the way that it's the only way he could create you to be the being that you are, to get you into heaven. Whereas atheism just goes, there you go, that massive hunch in your intuition turned out to be wrong. Atheism's been vindicated once again. And from my perspective, and from what I can see, atheism just keeps winning on that front. So
that's such, and this you brought me onto one of my favorite analogies, which is, this actually came from an early debate that Richard Carrier gave against someone, Wonchik, and his analogy was that atheism has supplanted, or naturalism has supplanted supernaturalism 10,000 times over history. You know, lightning used to be Thor, you know, cracking his hammer or whatever and getting angry, and thunder and blah blah blah. And this used to be that. And then we said, actually, we can explain it through this naturalistic explanation, right? And naturalism has supplanted supernaturalism 10,000 times. Supernaturalism has never once supplanted naturalism as an explanation for any data. And so therefore, when you're talking about other things like consciousness, or I don't know, the beginning of the universe or something like that, you've got two hypotheses, naturalism or supernaturalism. Do you bet on a horse that's won 10,000 times and never lost for the next race? Or do you bet on the horse that's lost 10,000 times and you just, come on, it's going to win this time? And so what do you have better inductive reasoning to support? Naturalism.
It's a good analogy. Yeah, I can see like people going for a Pascalian route, going, listen, as long as there's one chance in a million of that horse winning, you're going to get infinite utility, so you better go for that one. But I'm totally with you on that.
Which is all right when you've got the general supernaturalism, but Pascal, of course, was like putting all his eggs into the Christian basket, and of course, it's like, yeah, that's not the only God, mate. It's not the only God.
No, and also you take the Christian God. There's just so many different variants of it, because it depends on what doctrines you buy. It's going to massively change what that God is. So yeah, this is like many of the reasons that we've been discussing is just why I put theism at basically zero chance of being true, as defined as, you know, the Almighty God.
So yeah, you get born in a certain part of Belfast, you're going to hell. Sabra Berzovic, who is a brilliant, awesome member of the channel. I believe my intellect is improved by experiencing this conversation. Are you both divine entities? I can't speak for Stephen, but for me, almost certainly.
I'll keep it mysterious. I think that's the best bet. I've learned from others.
God, I should be more humble. Mind you, I think I am the most humble person I think I've ever met. Anyway, good gag. So which brings us on to the 0% chance of theism. I don't know whether you can answer this question. And by the way, thank you, Sabra. That's really, really generous. I genuinely mean that. Thank you. And for being a member as well. So what's your strongest argument for theism? If you think there's a negligible chance of theism being correct, is there one that gives you a little bit of a pause for thought?
So my favorite argument for all time is the watchmaker analogy, because of its intuitive force, because of it's just brilliant. I think it's so effective, and there's a reason why it's still got a hold on people, when at this point it is very obvious that evolution by natural selection is true. But under analysis, the watchmaker analogy isn't an argument for God. It's something that's consistent with basically any designer. It doesn't say anything about the designer still existing or what kind of attributes the designer would have had. In fact, if you look at the shoddy work that's been done in many cases, you would come to the conclusion that it's not by an omnipotent individual. So on analysis, I'd say that the best argument is, as Immanuel Kant pointed out, it's the ontological argument. But the problem is it's only the best in the sense that it would get you to God. Outside of that, it's just an awful argument. And then don't get me started on the modal ontological argument. That's the definition of philosophical masturbation. It's retarded, if you'll forgive my French. But yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I won't get you started on that, but thank you for that. This teleological arguments, which are what you were hinting at there, these arguments for poor design, I think are really interesting because for as many arguments, you're right, for as many arguments that there are to say, oh look, don't humans look design? It's like, yeah, you do realise I could choke very easily by eating, because my alimentary canal is closely connected to my breathing system, which is ridiculous. And then I've got appendicitis, thanks for that, and cancer and this and that, and these little bugs that can burrow, that have been designed to burrow into my eye and make me blind. Thank you very much for that. And all that. Yeah. So those are really, really powerful. But again, I guess, as you say, these all derive down to sort of can derive down to forms of problem of evil argument.
Yeah, and then they can explain it away. They can go, listen, there's the best possible world involve God creating wasps so that they have to inject their larvae into poor caterpillars that will eat them from the inside out, deliberately avoiding the crucial organs to prolong the experience. Believe me, that's the best of all possible worlds. Like, where's Voltaire when you need him? Like, what a stupid view. But technically, yeah, it could be, I guess. Well done. Checkmate.
Yeah, well, fair. Yeah. So you spoke in a recent video about, it's a short video, a nice little one about what would it take for you to worship God? And I thought that was quite an interesting question, because there's this problem when you look at the Bible and as an example of a God belief, and you say, oh dear, it looks like God's really interested in getting worshipped here. Praise is really important, which is odd for a God that has no lacking. Bizarre, but God apparently needs to be praised and worshipped, so it's a really bizarre idea anyway. But what would it take for you, if anything, to worship a God? What scenario could you imagine?
It really depends on the God, what doctrines you buy. So if you
Make one up.
say, well, basically, yeah, okay, so a God that would be worth worshipping, you'd need to understand what's actually possible, right? So I'm really not convinced that the world that we have is the best possible world. So if God existed and he had these traits, then I just don't think that the world would be the way that it is. And so any request I put in now wouldn't actually be applicable to the situation that it would be. But I guess the best way to convey it in a way that does utilize the world that we have is if we had universalism, so the idea that you're going to end up in heaven, like no matter what, and we buy Molinism, so that we can say that God has only created children that will want to be with him in heaven. So he knows you want to be in heaven, he's created you that way, and you're going to make it. Then that's a pretty cool circumstance to be in. Even if you don't think it is now, like he's created you in such a way that you'd figure it out, that actually this is, all that character development, that was great, and this is just a wonderful experience. I'm very grateful. So in some sense, being grateful, if you define worship as being grateful, then yeah, I'd be grateful, but not this traditional sense, right? This traditional sense of, getting on your knees and praying, or like singing songs of prayer. This just strikes me as an illness. Like a relatively decent human would find that repulsive. Why would an all-powerful, loving God think? I mean, nah. It just strikes me as gross. I don't think it's something I would do to something I would respect. I'd rather just treat it with just, hey, I really appreciate what you've done here. Thank you. I'd thank them, but that's
a really good point, actually. Just unpicking praise just in general is pretty ridiculous, especially if you're praising something that's ultimately powerful. For me, that the question of worship, I'm really happy that you differentiated between just being grateful and worshipping and praising, because in philosophy, when you're talking about free will, this is actually really a free will debate, because the idea of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness, these are technical terms that free will philosophers will talk about, which is to say that if you don't have libertarian free will, then actually you invalidate these ideas of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness, because someone is doing what they're doing because they're the person they're in this situation they're in. Like there's no merit for what they're doing. I talk about this in my book on free will, about how Ian Thorpe won an Olympic gold medal for swimming, right? Australian swimmer. And you're like, and everyone's, and you put a gold medal around it and you praise him. It's like, yeah, but he was born with the capability of having massive flipper feet. He's got a big body. And this is what John Rawls called the natural lottery, is like he had parents that took him down religiously to the swimming pool and so on and so forth. And he was the person he was in the situation he was, and he got a gold medal for doing that. It's like, technically, we should just go, well, of course. I mean, that's the universe working, but we have this natural kind of want to praise. But when you're talking about a God who's constrained completely by their own character, I don't think, and I'd like to ask you now, actually, whether you think God could have free will. And obviously, free will to me doesn't make sense at all. So God couldn't have it anyway. But like to praise something that's just fulfilling its destiny almost. I don't really like using that word. It seems like utterly bizarre. Anyway, sorry, there's a lot of me talking.
No, I get where you're coming from. So does God have free will? Well, as you said, because he's defined by, because he's maximally good, he has to do what's maximally good. So to say that he has the freedom to not act that way is just false. So he has to act in a maximal way. Now, there might be, in some cases, variants of what he could do if we wanted to put on our libertarian hats, but there's going to be certain situations per their reasoning for the appearing gratuitous evil that we see, where actually that is the best that he can do, and he couldn't have acted otherwise. He had to do the best, otherwise he wouldn't be the maximally great God, or he wouldn't have that maximal attribute to its maximal capacity. So yeah, I'm tempted to say no. God can't have free will in that sense.
I would add to that the biggest defeater for free will with God having free will is the notion of his own divine foreknowledge. If you believe in divine foreknowledge, God has a divine foreknowledge of all future events, but that also includes himself. In other words, he has an infallible knowledge about his own behavior and decisions that he makes in the future, and therefore when the future comes he cannot not do that, and so therefore his own divine foreknowledge constricts his own behavior to one single thing, full stop. And if he was to deviate from that track, it would invalidate his foreknowledge, his infallible foreknowledge. So he literally, there's no way that I can see that God would have anything that would look like the libertarian free will, if you can make sense of that concept anyway.
Yeah, agreed. That's a good point.
Which gets us perhaps onto good old the Kalam. So you've been involved. Talk us through a little bit about working with Joe Schmidt. As I said, I did an interview with Joe Schmidt last week, and you are doing a Kalam series with him. What's it like working with him? How's your experience been? Have you learned a lot more about the Kalam? What is it about the Kalam that's so interesting? Talk us through the whole thing.
Yeah, wow, where to start? So first of all, Joe's very patient, so he's eager to get the next episode out. It's my end that's holding it up big time. It's not him at all. And he's just a wonderful, brilliant young mind that's he's made himself accessible to people. And so I utilize that for all it's worth. He's very knowledgeable, very useful to bounce ideas across from. And his knowledge of the Kalam is very, very impressive. He knows a tremendous deal about it. He lives and breathes this stuff. He will have watched this video, for example, before it's even out. Don't know how. He's omnipotent. Like, he watches and digests everything, especially if it pertains to his field at all, which of course means I can't say anything nasty about him, which I definitely would if he wasn't going to be watching this. Yeah, it's been great. It's been great. I've learned a lot while doing it, and I figured out better ways to approach things because of his insight. So yeah, it's It's been awesome, and there's plenty of episodes to come.
Okay, so for the viewers who don't know, quickly explain what the Kalam is, the old Kalam, I would call it,
Sure.
and why does it interest you as an argument?
Sure. So the Kalam cosmological argument, in a nutshell, says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. That's the first premise. Second premise is that the universe began to exist, and the conclusion is therefore the universe has a cause. And this argument, what's quite unique about the Kalam is there's various different ways to defend those premises, and lots of them get airtime. So if you want to say that whatever begins to exist has a cause, then you could do this by appealing to Hilbert's Hotel, like William Lane Craig does, or you could be appealing to the idea that what me and Joe are going to be coining, or what's kind of known as the argument from chaos, and that is that if things could come into being uncaused, then it becomes inexplicable, as Craig has mentioned, why things don't just come into existence uncaused all of the time. There's nothing to constrain it. There's various different arguments for the Kalam, and the reason it's so juicy is because you have a lot to bite into. Paley's watchmaker argument, you're going to have the analogy, and you're just going to be fixated on that. And fine, there's other teleological arguments, but they one objection. If you get an objection to one of those arguments, it's probably going to be transferable to the other arguments. Whereas that's just not the same with the Kalam. If you come to Hilbert's Hotel and you have objections to the way that to the conclusions that Craig draws from it, that's not going to be applicable to many of the other arguments, such as, say, Alex Pruse's defense of the first premise, which technically is the new Kalam, where they rely on causal finitism. There's a lot to be discussed there, and it's become, thanks to Craig and a few others, it's become like the go-to argument for apologetics and theism in general, which has always struck me as a bit weird, because you can just grant it and it really doesn't get you anywhere near God, like at all. It doesn't. You could either have the Kalam be true and you're going to be stood in a location where you've got all of your work still ahead of you if you're a theist, or you can have it be false, as Aquinas hints at, and you're still in the same place. You've still got all of your work still ahead of you. So it's a very weird phenomenon that this has become like a central stage argument. But
I guess is it because it's kind of why is there something rather than nothing type thing? Like one of the biggest questions are like, why are we here, or how are we here? And maybe it kind of feeds into that, which is why it gets us all really excited, as opposed to other arguments that maybe not so fundamental.
See, I think that the watchmaker analogy was the best argument. It's been thoroughly beaten. So intelligent people, or people that are sufficiently educated, know that it's just not the route to go for. And so now you appeal to the next gap, or a different gap that's got something that might provide an answer. And you're completely correct, of course, that it's about Leibniz's question of why is there something rather than nothing. But the thing is that the Kalam talks about causation, and not necessarily causation is a type of explanation. So, all causes are an explanation, but not all explanations are causes. So if you're looking for an explanation about the universe and why is there something rather than nothing, you better assume that it's a cause. Otherwise, the Kalam's going to have nothing to say about it, because that premise has nothing to do with the other types of explanation, such as necessity, which is where you're going to have to go with the contingency argument and whatnot. So I can see why cosmological arguments more broadly have been what's discussed. But the thing that really is interesting to me is that it actually doesn't answer the question of why there's something from nothing, at least not as far as I'm concerned. I don't know where you stand on this, but let's say that we've got this chain of contingency. So I'm bridging it more into there so that we can broaden it to explanation and not just like cause, which is one type of explanation. We've got this infinite chain, or this chain that goes back for a long time. And we're looking for really the answer of why is there something rather than nothing. We don't want to just say at some point, it just is, the brute fact route of Bertrand Russell. We don't like that. We want an explanation. The principle of sufficient reason's got to work, across the board. And so what people tend to do is to look for something that's going to give us an answer that's it quenches our thirst, and so they go down into necessity. And lots of atheists do this, Graham Oppy and others, and fair enough. Like on this proposition, I'm very agnostic. I don't know really. If you put my feet to the fire, I'm actually going to say that I don't believe in a necessary being, but I'm agnostic on it. But if you do buy a necessary being, the idea that's like put across by people that endorse it, specifically theists, is they think that we've just answered why there's something from nothing. No, you haven't. You haven't at all, because you can just say, why are there some necessary beings rather than no necessary beings? And they can't answer that.
And it depends on the whole framework of possible worlds, which some philosophers just say, well, actually, this is not a thing. do you know what I mean? To put it simply. And then the argument that, well, if you can argue that as you say, you want to stop there's something called Munchausen Trilemma, which is there are three ways of grounding anything: an explanation, an argument, whatever. Three ways. You can ground it in a circle: A because of B, B because of C, C because of A. So you're grounding that in a circle. You've got the infinite regress: A because of B because of C, D, on forever. Or to get around that, you have a brute fact, an axiom, a self-evident truth. So just because, right? And so God, for theists, is that, as a necessary being, is this self-evident truth, supposedly, is a brute fact, effectively. And my argument, one of my arguments would be, well, why can't the universe be a brute fact? And actually, I would say there's an Occam's razor thing going on here, which is, if I can just say the universe is a necessary entity, then that's simpler than saying God plus the universe. So God is necessary plus the universe. So actually, you're multiplying, entities unnecessarily here, and God is just confusing things, especially since God is a mystery. So it's not a very good explanation. So I don't know. What are your thoughts to that?
I completely agree, and it relates to what we were saying earlier about like atheism versus theism and the commitments it gets you to make. Like in that scenario, the theists have just committed themselves to more things, and they don't have a greater explanation. They're still grounding out in a brute fact. If they're not going to say that God's a brute fact like Richard Swinburne does, then they're going to say that the fact that there are necessary beings, there's a set of necessary beings, even if it's just one, it's a singleton set. You've still got a brute fact. And the thing that drives me absolutely crazy, and it's why I would say I lean more towards there not being a necessary being, is that we really don't want a brute fact, right? No one wants it. That's a costly thing to buy, because you're just saying there's no answer to something. We don't want it, right? Now, the problem is that when it comes to a necessary being, I don't want that either. Like, where else do you explain something by saying that it explains itself? Like, why is this tolerable? Why do you think that this is a respectful answer? This is ridiculous. Now, of course, there's ways to cash that out where it's not ridiculous, but by my lights, I really don't want to buy that. And if you're going to tell me, as soon as I buy it, the next question is going to be, why are there some necessary beings rather than no necessary beings? I'm going to have to buy the brute fact anyway. And I'm not buying the necessary being as well.
If given the Munchausen trilemma, then what are your options? If you don't want to take a brute fact, so because often axioms are seen as the most the best form of foundation, because an axiom is a self-evident truth. Now the argument isn't, well, are they really actually self-evident and true? That's where the argument is. But people seem to think that an axiom is preferable to an infinite regress or a circle. So therefore, if you're to say, I don't want a brute fact, then what are your options?
Well, yeah, even if you take an infinite chain, right? So I seem to be a bit strange. My intuitions have no problem with an infinite chain. I just don't see an issue with it. And the arguments against it appeal to basically either thing. They say there's contradictions in it when there's not. By my lights, at least, there's not. I don't think that anyone's demonstrated that there's a contradiction in an infinite chain. Or they basically become incredulous. Like they just go, Aquinas did this. Like the way that he writes, is just like, you can't have that. That would be strange, or that would be nonsense. And it's like, sorry, that's not an argument. Like, it's perfectly fine to have an infinite chain. But if we can extrapolate and distance ourselves to say, why is there an infinite chain rather than no infinite chain? That's where I'll buy the brute fact. But before that, I'm probably going to buy saying that it's probably a mistake, a category error to do that. Like, maybe you just can't do that. Maybe our intuition tells you can, but you actually can't, because by stepping out, you're implying that you're in something else. But the point is that you're in the entirety. You've got the entirety the complete chain before you. You can't step out of it. You're somehow committing a category error. All of this stuff, like, I'm agnostic on, and like it's a mind-blowing thing to think about. But yeah, it's
this is where you mentioned Phil Halper, and for anyone interested, I've interviewed Phil Halper, one of my earlier interviews, so go and check that out. But I've long been in touch with him as far as we were talking about debates he was involved in, and we were chatting about stuff and whatever. But he's got such a great collection of documentaries that you should all check out. And you've referenced one already that then gets attacked by William Lane Craig, and then they answer William Lane Craig back again. But anyway, there's one recently that they did with mathematicians and philosophers of mathematics and science, talking about actually William Lane Craig, who's a philosopher we keep mentioning, who is a big proponent of the Kalam, doesn't like infinity, but he's quite disingenuous with the way he explains that to different audiences depending on what their expertise are, and then just basically kind of bastardizes maths understanding and the philosophy of maths. And Phil got loads of experts and kind of blew it out of the water. A fantastic set of videos, so obviously I suggest anyone goes to read them, watch them.
But of course, if you watch William Lane Craig, then you'll get the narrative that everyone else just doesn't understand what Craig's saying. It's crazy, right? So
well, of course. Well, part of the problem that they pick on is that William Lane Craig, if you're going to talk about the second premise of the universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. So his understanding, in order to substantiate his claims within that second, when he argues about that second premise, he has to cherry pick his science and take fringe scientific views. I don't want to get into it, like the neo-Lorentzian viewpoints. But he is a science cherry picker and a real, like, I'd say almost disingenuous with the way he deals with science. Well, what are your thoughts? Yeah. I mean, you haven't done the videos on that yet in your series, but is that your understanding?
Yeah, so I've got like this weird duality of a perception when it comes to Craig. On the one hand, I think he's brilliant. His writing's really good. He's very smart. He's very good at debates, excellent at debates. He knows what he's doing. He's a very effective communicator. There's a lot of positive words I'd use towards his description on that front. But I would genuinely say that I think that he has in his mind that theism is true, that Christianity is true, and he genuinely thinks that he's acting towards the greater good, saving souls, by being obtuse when it comes to some of these things. It's been explained to him so many times by like Wes Morriston, by you just name them. Like, there's no way that someone that intelligent can be that incompetent. So he's put himself in a situation where he's either very incompetent or he's very intelligent, and I think he's intelligent. I don't think it's the other way around. So
do you think that, because actually I was going to talk to you about this, so you've done a few videos on William Lane Craig and how he's coming out with certain things at the moment. He's getting into a bit of hot water with some of his Christian acolytes or followers, because he's saying certain things that are like, oh, hang on, there's not a real Adam and Eve. Oh dear, this is a bit problematic.
Yeah.
Do you think he's getting to a place now where he's getting a lot older, as we all happens to us all, but he's got a business empire that's sorted, and that everything's in place now, that he's in a lot safer position to start saying things that he truly believes rather than things he's felt he's had to say?
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. I have seen a lot of people comment to the effect of saying that he has changed the way that he's approaching things, and it could be for age, it could be for genuine changes in his views. I'm not entirely sure what's going on that front, but I do see the phenomena that you're stating there. He seems to be saying the quiet part out loud a bit more, and it's making it harder for apologists to defend him. Which is good to see, because it just shows that they recognize that, okay, maybe I don't want to lean on Craig for everything. Maybe I can say that I think he's good on this front, but maybe not on this front. So it's a good thing to see. But then for every person like that, you've got 5 that will just follow Craig and parrot what he's saying, no matter what it is. So if Craig's saying certain things about Adam and Eve, then they're going to just follow along, kind of thing. Religion has this weird authority kind of element to it, which you don't typically get with philosophy in general. Like, so it's one of the ways that theology seems to be distinguished from theology is distinguished from philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, this is span time because I've only spanned a couple of times, right, Stephen? So, I've got to do it again. So this is a book from 2016 I wrote, which is Did God Create the Universe from Nothing? Countering William Lane Craig's Kalam Cosmological Argument. And that is a book on the Kalam with a foreword by Jeffrey J. Lauder. I've got some contributions by Dr. James East on the mathematics of infinity and counter-apologists who talks about science and stuff. That great book. You should all go and get that, definitely, of course. But in that book, I mean, we've talked about a couple of arguments. One of my favorite arguments revolves around something called conceptual nominalism, which is the idea that abstract ideas don't exist. So, for example, you and I can talk about a chair and we can understand each other because we've had shared experience and shared culture, but a chair might not mean the same to an aboriginal person from 5000 BCE or an alien or a cat. So for a cat, it's a bed and it can't. So in other words, all these concepts and in fact moral laws and everything are abstract ideas that will die with the death of humanity and sentient creatures, right? So what we do is we create languages that allow us to navigate the world. And we build up our laws based on our moral reasoning, which is all from language, and we cut things up into certain ways and reality into certain ways. The reason I'm saying all this is that this is hugely important for the Kalam, because when Craig says everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence, or anyone who says that, then you're talking about things beginning to exist. When you talk about a chair, that chair, it's only a chair because we ascribe conceptually chairness to it. But chairness doesn't exist objectively. And those atoms existed previously, and it's a reformation of those atoms into a certain way. And when does that chair stop becoming a chair? We can disagree. I can cut one of the legs off and still say it's a chair, and you might say it's not a chair anymore. And so there is no objective chairness. And so when we're talking about things beginning to exist, I would argue that is completely undercut by conceptual nominalism, and it depends on a form of abstract realism that I think is problematic. So that's my big attack of the Kalam. Are you going to be talking about that at all in your future videos?
Yeah, there's notes that we are going into that. And I love the way that you describe it there with you take a concept, a universal such as a chair, and then you start like going, hey, if we move this many atoms away from it, is it still a chair? And this is basically, as you said, it's almost like Theseus's chair. When's it not a chair anymore? There's no replacement, to be fair. But yeah. No, I think that's a really good rebuttal. And what's great about it is that Craig endorses universalism. Endorses nominalism, right? He's not someone who buys
certain concepts,
forms. Yeah, and so actually that's something he would have to take very, very seriously. I'm not sure if he's written on that in his works. He probably has, because he's written a lot.
In his book, Reasons, I can't remember what it's called. I've got it back there. Something reason, let us reason, or something. He talks about this, and Joe Schmidt talked about this in a previous video, which is like he talks about, well, William Lane Craig, what do you mean I don't exist? Have I been existing since the Jurassic era, and all this kind of stuff? And he calls it mereological nihilism, and he's just wrong about that. And I picked that anyway. You've got this book. You should give it a read, and we'll have a pint.
You're gonna come to the office. We're gonna have a pint. It's gonna be good.
Good stuff. So anything else that you'd like to say about the Kalam at all?
No, I think I've got the main points across. Mainly that it's an interesting argument in the sense that an objection to one argument or defense of one of the premises is not going to necessarily be applicable to other defenses. And so there's lots of room to have lots of different conversation, which is really interesting. But the main thing is that you can just grant it. It really, really is not more expected on theism than it is atheism. It doesn't get you anywhere. Like, so by my lights, it's such a pointless argument in that sense. But most theists, it seem to think that a necessary being, which again, the Kalam doesn't get you to, you're going to have to go with something a bit more broad. I mean, there's the ways that you could do it. They seem to think that that's more expected on theism, and I guess if you think it's more expected on theism, then you can say that this is a bit of evidence, a few coins in favor of theism. But I just don't think it's any more expected, a necessary being, on theism than it is atheism. So it does nothing. Like, it's just not. It's completely. It doesn't have steam. There's just nothing to it for me in that sense. But I'd spend a lot of time on it because it's interesting, and a lot of people claim it to be an argument for God, don't they, Frank Turek?
Yeah.
So,
Kevin Non-Tradicath, Against Parthood is an excellent essay on mereological nihilism. That essay single-handedly turned me into a mereological nihilist. So conceptual nominalism is very similar, if not the same position, and I'll be interested to read that. I personally think the argument from abstracts about abstract ideas and the ontological argument about what abstract ideas is the single most important argument, an area of debate within the philosophy of religion. Literally everything else depends on that. So when you start saying abstract ideas don't exist apart from in the mind, when your mind constructs them, then that's literally everything you're talking about, from mathematics, morality, what is loyalty, ideas of everything we have are constructed, I used to think free will was the most fundamental argument to have in philosophy, because if you can show that free will is incoherent, libertarian free will, then the judgmental God makes no sense. So actually, if I was to debate William Lane Craig, I always said that I would debate on free will first and then see where we go from there. But actually, abstract ideas is even more fundamental. So abstract ideas, free will, and then you can have the God arguments. I don't know. So that's me just banging on there, Stephen.
No, I agree with you. Abstract ideas, Platonic forms, universals, nominalism, what you buy in that realm is going to affect just about all your views, or it's going to affect a hell of a lot of them. What's funny is it's one of those areas where I think the Phil Papers 2022, they revealed that about 40% say Platonic forms exist and about 40% say they don't. And it's one of those examples again where people are all over the place. And yet for me, I lean really quite heavily towards nominalism. It's really hard to make any sense of Platonic forms. And then when people do start talking about ones that they would think are real, I actually think they're linguistically messing up. They're just talking about analytical frameworks, and they're not talking about, actual abstract things or universals. So I'd lean quite heavily into the nominalism side.
Yeah, and I obviously naturally agree with you there. And the thing then becomes an epistemological argument. This is the divine command theory issue, which is like, if God has these commands and the commands are what makes things right or wrong, then, how do we know when we're being right or wrong? How do we know that we've got the right God? How do we know what the commands are? It's a bit like Platonic forms. How do we know what the Platonic form? How do we know what objective morality is? Like, how do we verify that? How do we check that? It's no good just saying there's a Platonic realm where these things exist as ideas if I have absolutely no way of being able to access that realm or know that I'm accessing that realm. Therefore, effectively, and this is kind of a Kantian approach, which is like, you can't know the thing in and of itself. You've got a subjective framework that you interpret everything through. I'm starting to rant.
No, you don't need to apologize. I'm with you. I'm just listening intently. I'm with you.
And by the way, if anyone has any super chats or any questions they want to get into, Stephen, please do so. That would be fantastic. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer anything you throw at him, or at least hold his hands up and say, do you know what? I don't know. In fact, so that's something. Do you find that you are more open to saying you don't know about things these days? Have you kind of developed an epistemic humility at all?
Yeah, definitely. So when you interact with theists, at least in the way that I have, they're very, very sure on everything. Craig's an example. He's so certain on his views, yet they're completely fringe. You get people that are making definitive statements about Platonic forms. They're making definitive statements about morality. They're just very sure across the board. And it cultivates an environment where that seems to be normal, that like that's okay. But one of the great things is actually reading the Phil papers themselves. The Phil paper survey, I should say, 2022 is one example, because then you get to see what like people that have been studying this for decades think on these topics. And when you realize that basically they don't agree on, if you want the thing they agree on the most, it's atheism. It's like massively high. It's like 70% nearly of philosophers are atheists. That's as high as you're going to get.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is on the 2009 Phil paper, so I haven't looked closely at the 2022 results yet. But in 2009, it broadly said that about 14% of philosophers believe in free will, libertarian free will, right? And it turns out, if you look at the metadata, those are the same people that believe in God. So in other words, you only believe in libertarian free will if you believe in God, because you kind of need to, because otherwise you don't get heaven and hell. That makes no sense if you don't get libertarian free will. So there are these certain areas where people broadly agree on, and you can understand why they disagree. But things like morality, the most central idea of philosophy, is like, we're as split now as we were 5,000 years ago. So go figure.
Precisely. It's like, and once you've realized that this is what's happening with the greatest minds, you give yourself a license to say, well, you understand that that's perfectly okay. Like, you're not meant to know the answers to these things. Like, what's the right epistemology? That's a very hard question. And while theists in general pretend that they've got this figured out, they haven't, like, at all. they just assert that they have. And like, so for me, reading philosophers, looking at like a distribution of what they believe, gave me permission to recognize my intuition that it's okay to say I don't know, or to say on this thing I'm very agnostic, or on this thing, it could be one of a multiplicity of things. So I'm very happy with my humility, or like my humble disposition, I should say, in the sense of just saying I don't know when I don't know, or just saying I haven't researched that enough when I haven't researched it enough. It's just the right way to be, and it's the way I want others to be. So you need to embody it yourself, right?
Yeah, for sure. Be the change you want to see and stuff like that. So thank you very much, Ricky. Super sticker, really, really generous, and he's a member as well, so a bit of a legend. So let's go left field for a bit here, if you don't mind. Are you okay for time?
Yep, I'm fine with time.
Cool beans. So you've been in a little bit of hot water to do with sort of freedom of speech previously, and let's not get into the long weeds of that particular debate. But I'm interested to see what you think about freedom of speech. I mean, freedom of speech as an idea is kind of broken, right? Because there's always limits. Like, you can't stand up as a 12-year-old kid in class and just swear at your teacher and shout in their face, right? But that's freedom of speech. But that's not appropriate, and that should be frowned upon. So there are issues to the concept of a completely free freedom of speech. How do you see freedom of speech, and how do you make it workable?
Yeah, a good question. So if you take the child getting up and screaming at the teacher, she's not in a place that's a public forum there. Rather, it's a private institution, or at least it functions as such. It's like going into a theatre. No, you don't get to yell fire. Why don't you get to yell fire? It's part of like the contract you sign when you go into the theatre. So you can control what can and can't be said, creating safe spaces, if you will, if you want to use a very broad definition for it, in all sorts of areas. So if you're in a church, you might want to say that we can't talk about certain things, and it's okay to do that because it's inside a space. But as long as there's an ability for people to express their views, then I'd say that you've got free speech. And I do mean any view. Like, people have to be able to express views that you absolutely despise. Principle is not a principle until it costs you, and the cost of free speech is you're going to hear things that make your blood boil. You're going to hear views that you really, really despise. The interesting question today, though, is that the public sphere is Twitter, it's YouTube, it's Facebook, it's these big private companies. So they fall under the realm of like a private company, so they can dictate what can and can't be said, but they are essentially the public forums, and so they shouldn't really be in the business of that. So free speech is difficult, but as long as there's a place where people can express it, that's what I want. I want people to be able to express any view, because if you're going to make progress with them, you're not going to do it by not allowing them to express their thoughts and be in a safe space, a situation where they actually can convey their ideas, because you're not going to be able to give them the answers they need or give them the corrections that they need, because you've basically made it so that they just can't express those views altogether.
Yeah, I mean, here's an anecdote, and I spoke to you about before we went live about this. I used to write at Patheos Non-Religious. So Patheos Network is an interfaith network, all the different religions and non-religion and whatever, having this conversation debate. And I used to, on my blog there, my threads, I had a really open free speech principle, which is you can say pretty horrible things, and I'm not gonna censor you, but you need to substantiate what you say. This should be good faith discussions, and quite often you get people saying horrible things, but they say them in bad faith, and they're not willing to back them up or be honest with the way that they substantiate those things. In which case they get hoisted by their own petard, and that's kind of the intention, which is I want you to say these things. I don't want you to say these things, but I'm fine with you saying these things, because actually we'll get to a better version of the truth when we start arguing about them. What was interesting is at Patheos, we were cancelled. So the non-religious channel was literally shut down because a fundamentalist CEO took over and said we didn't want, A, we were politically too left for them, and too anti-Trump or anti-like Christian right and nationalism, and B, we were attacking Christians and we can't have that. So we got cancelled. But for me, that was really important. But it is quite difficult to navigate as well, because you have so many vitriolic viewpoints from both sides, actually, meaning that when you have these more disreputable opinions, the people jump on them from both sides, and it becomes very difficult to actually have good faith debates. Was that your experience?
Yeah. So the age of information is wonderful. It gives us access to all of this wonderful stuff. But the algorithms that run our life make it so that you're going to find like-minded people, and then you're just going to end up in this circle jerk where you're just sharing the same views. Like, it's always a problem. Like, if you're an atheist, have theist friends is important. Okay. Yes, you disagree on really big things. And if you choose the right words, you'll be able to present it in a way which makes it basically impossible for you to have a relationship with them. But that's the problem. Like, when we start using our language in such a way as to paint the other person as reprehensible, or people that don't have our view as reprehensible, you take conversation off the table. A really good example of this is abortion. So if you go to one side of the camp, say pro-life, and you go all the way into that side, they will, pro-life itself is implying if you're not pro-life, then you're anti-life. Oh, wow.
I've started calling them anti-choice now. So yeah.
Well, this is it. Like, but if you go to the other side, you've got pro-choice, and it's like saying, "Oh, well, if you don't agree with us, then you're anti-choice. That's bad." And the language just does it does the job of painting someone as not someone that disagrees with you on like where to draw the line on sentience, or like where to draw the line of when a human begins, but rather they're monsters that are anti-choice or they're anti-life. And when you sit in your circle jerks, in your echo chambers, you just get encouraged to become more and more toxic and dogmatic and tribalistic, which is lots of the traits I absolutely despise about religion, but you find it in everything. That's the issue I'm seeing with the days that we live in. The algorithms encourage that kind of division.
So really, say I disagree with you on whatever view that you had that got you into trouble, right? Really, what we should be doing is entering into a good faith debate, because by shutting you down or by jumping on you, that is actually going to entrench you in your original position without actually dealing with the rationality of it. In other words, if I want to disabuse you or anyone of an incorrect viewpoint, in my opinion, then I need to be able to deal with that viewpoint in good faith and have these good faith debates.
Yeah, and then there's also an angle that it might be that you actually are in the right, but I just can't see it. And that's okay. Humans don't, we know that we're all wrong on some stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. You don't have to throw someone out if they're wrong on something. So it could
Yeah.
be that, for instance. And what do you do then? Like, do you discard that individual? Well, if you phrase your language in such a way, then you'll do it because you'll paint them out to be a complete monster. Yeah, it's a problem.
Are you saying that the non-theist needs theist friends, right? Is what you said. So, as a non-racist, do I need to go and get some racist friends?
Yeah, good. I like it. It's a good reductio. Well, if you want to make progress with racists, yeah, you, in the sense that you need to actually understand where they're coming from. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to meet them because you're going to get your information from your echo chamber, and it's wrong. It's just wrong. Like, they're going to give you straw men representations of what they actually think, and so you're not going to make much progress. Now, when I say be friends, it is hard to be friends with somebody that you disagree with hugely. So, for example, I can be friends with people that eat foie gras and eat veal. I think what they're doing is genuinely reprehensible. I think it's just such a disgusting thing. It's so unnecessary. You don't need to do that to a sentient creature. But I can be friends with them. But then there's other things where I just can't be friends with them. I remember trying to talk with a neo-Nazi and trying to help this neo-Nazi not have the views that he had. And I started feeling sick. I just repulsed in myself. I was like, well, I'm not the person to do this. I just don't like this individual. And in fact, I'm just going to start becoming abusive to this individual. So each person's going to have different levels of ability to be able to converse with people that they disagree with, depending on the topic. So that's another factor to consider.
I wrote an article once, can you be friends with people you disagree with, talking about exactly this. But I guess when I was, the joking reductio I did, you answered so well, is of course, in my normal life, I don't want racist friends because I just want to live my life without that kind of effort and issue. But if I'm interested in disabusing racists of their racist views, then I do need racist friends in order to try and break down those bad ideas, which is kind of the atheist theist, which is I'm an atheist and I'm arguing for that as kind of my job, right? And so therefore I need theist friends in order to understand properly what they believe, to break down those divides and to try and to be the best way to disabuse of those ideas.
And there's also a dissimilarity between theists and racists, because racism.
Yeah, I don't want to make them equivalent.
No. Yeah. But I get it. But like, let's say that if you meet a racist, they're racist. It's implied in the name. They're going to have bigoted views towards race. There are theists you'll meet that are not homophobic, or if they are, it's not crucial to their theism, and you can probably get them to shove on that. Whereas you might not get them to shove from theism, but you might be able to get them to just chill the hell out when it comes to like their homophobic views. Right. So there's that as well. I mean, only invest yourself in so much as you have influence. That's a lesson I learned when I was young. And
what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, I think I might have coined it, but yeah, only invest yourself in so much as you have influence. So when I was young, I had my mum that was an alcoholic. And I tried hard to try and get her to overcome the alcoholism, right? I tried hard to get us to have a life that's worth living, basically. The mistake is that I didn't have influence over her and when she picks up the bottle. So I invested myself disproportionately to what I have influence on. And so I've taken the lesson from that to only invest yourself in so much as you have influence. So if you can see with someone that there's progress to be made, or that there's a meaningful conversation to be had, then have it. But if you get to a state where you're like, no, this person's entrenched and they're not going to change their views, it's probably just bad for your health to keep pushing yourself against that rock. And I've been there with people, and it's very hard to draw that line, and a lot of people just won't have that line at all. But ultimately, we all have views that other people find terrible. Veganism is a good example of this because it's the new one that's coming up, where if you take the vegan narrative, most people are horrendous, like absolutely horrendous. And yeah, if they want to make any headway in that space, then they've got to talk with people that, frankly, they think are like basically murderers. So they've got to do that. Otherwise, they're just not going to make any headway.
Fun fact: I'm a vegan. Well, actually, vegan plus fish. But I've written about that. So there's a joke that I often say, because there's this really weird thing that people push back on veganism really, really badly. And yes, there are evangelical vegans. I'm not one of those, but there's a joke I always say, which is you go to a cocktail party, you say, "Oh, by the way, I'm a paedophile vegan," and they go, "What? You're a vegan?"
Yeah.
And it's like, what is it about that? And I wrote an article to say that I think what's going on here is that veganism is a moral position. So whenever you announce to someone that you're a vegan, you're automatically saying, I've taken a moral position, and if you're not a vegan, you are less moral than I am. And so therefore that then the other person, they might not realize this, but implicitly they do realize this. So how do I deal with someone who's just announced they're morally better than me? Then they have to say, they trash that person because they're not interested in getting involved in this argument. Well, they do. Sometimes they defend meat eating, like in certain ways, or they attack the vegan. And that then justifies their own feeling of moral as inferiority to balance the books. And I think that's what's probably going on with a lot of people. There's that intuitive kickback to a moral proclamation.
Yeah. When we think of morality, we try and think of it as something that is consistent. I'm no longer convinced that it is consistent. I think it's just like a social group, and it extends out according to basically your GPD. You make it so that you have access to more food, that you're sheltered. If you take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you get yourself higher into the top of that pyramid where you're self-actualizing, then your circle of altruism is going to extend out to pretty much all sentient beings. Whereas I think that's basically what's going on. Whereas most people think of morality as being consistent. And so if you're going to draw the line on anything to do with, say, being human, then there's issues that come with that. If you're going to draw it on being a mammal, there's issues that come with that. If you're going to draw it on sentience, then where you're actually living an inconsistent life unless you are vegan. And so, my experience has been that as well. I mean, I'm vegetarian, so I'm hated by both sides. It's the equivalent of being a centrist on politics.
Your point about GDP and your point about Maslow's hierarchy of need is absolutely spot on. And I'd love to talk to you. We won't have time, but I really agree with that. So what happens is when you're at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so what you notice just before 2008, before the economic downturn hit, the recession, everyone was ethically buying, like all the supermarkets in Britain were selling organic stuff or this and that. We had disposable income to think about our moral decisions that were far distant from ourselves. So I'm thinking about animals on the other side of the world, or fair trade, what people are getting paid in South Africa or whatever, right? And then as soon as the economic recession hit, the supermarkets cut back on all that stuff because people are buying by price. And as soon as you are going down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you are not then considered with these big moral questions about self-actualization, my place to fit in the world. It's like, I need to put food on my table. And so I think you're absolutely spot on there. But I've been meaning to get Joe Schmidt's question up here, and now's the time. So 2 questions for Prof. Woodford. 1.
Okay.
Why do you deny modus tollens arguments? And 2, when will you upload your next video in the Kalam series with the ever juicy Joseph Schmitty?
All right. Okay. So first of all, just give me 1 sec.
Oh dear.
See, he says that I'm a professor. I'm not. I'm actually a lord now. Okay. So, I'm actually Lord Stephen Woodford. You know how you get this situation where people are theists, get demons, and then they walk around insisting that they get called PhDs in some churches, etc. Well, the next time that happens, I'm going to insist that they call me a lord.
You genuinely? Do you genuinely have a little lordship?
Yeah, well, I've got it in the sense that you can buy land in Scotland and you become a lord, but it's like, But then again, so is treating a demon like a PhD. So I'll take Lord. Thank you very much, Schmid.
Yeah.
Do I deny Locke's modus tollens argument? No, I think it's the best argument that's ever been created. I'm now a theist. Good job. And then when will you upload your next video on the Kalam series? Probably within a potential infinite. That's probably the best answer for that.
That's as brilliant as I would expect. Excellent. James Appleton, who's also a member, thank you so much for this. Fundamentalist Christianity, in your view, is it partly a mafia? Racketeering schemes, selling fraudulent afterlife insurance, turf wars, sex crimes, etc. And this is coming from James, who is experienced for many years with the Jehovah's Witness cult. Actually, he was on, if you want to check my Jehovah's Witness video, James was on with another guest talking about their experience with very much a dangerous cult, I would say. What are your views on fundamentalist Christianity?
Well, I would say where James has put partly, I think that yes, I would say that that's an element. It's religion has tremendous power, and you're giving the best thing ever, which is an afterlife, and so it gives you massive leverage. And then when you've like created universities around it, and you've got doctorates around it, and all the rest of it, yeah, I'd say that it lends itself to that. And then if you just look at how religion operates in places that are not, let's say, middle class, then yeah, you start seeing more of this. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses are known for their cult-like behavior, and it's the Jehovah's Witnesses that I know, specifically actually those that are now ex, they've got horrible stories to tell about excommunication and all the rest of it. So they lost their entire life because of it. It wasn't enough to just lose their epistemology, their ontology, their morality. No, you actually have to lose your family, because that's how toxic religion can be. So yeah, I at least agree, especially with it being partly. It's like, yeah, there's definitely an element of this.
Please check out my video with James and another guest where we discuss that, and it's really, there's some moving moments. It is pretty raw experiences that he's had. Excellent. Just to, before we go down this, sort of start wrapping up with the quick fire questions I have for you. You are, because you are slowly taking over the world, you have, I only say this out of pure jealousy, you have a game that you have developed yourself. What's going on there? Okay, so
this was a great way to annoy theists, so it was totally worth it. Where I do logical fallacy.
Sorry, did you sit down and go, now, I really want to piss off theists, so what can I do? Like, well, of all the things I could do, what could I do?
What was my thoughts? I love playing board games and card games and stuff just in that area. I always have. I enjoy video games, play StarCraft, play World of Warcraft. Like, I enjoy video games. It's something to do with just games in general. It's very, I guess it's simulating war is like one of the theories about it, but my mind is just that way inclined. So I've always enjoyed games, and I realized that I was bringing up fallacies a lot, and people were getting something valuable from it. It was helping them with their discourse and to understand why certain things are not accepted. Essentially, you can just apply the reasoning somewhere else and see if the person accepts it. When they don't, you can point out that the reasoning is the problem, and that's what they've got in their argument. So I made a game which the game has loads of fallacies in it, and then it's also got so you got the fallacies that are white, which are here. Then you've got arguments. That's the watchmaker analogy. I've taken liberty of, I guess you could say, straw manning them if you want to be maybe a little bit unfair, but basically it's a game. Just chill out. It's cool. So you take the false analogy, the false cause, the special pleading, and I've constructed arguments around it. And then I've got blue cards, which are action cards that allow you to manipulate the deck and steal cards from others. Red cards that let you react to people. And I even got Hitchens in because his lovely widow gave me permission to put him in, which is absolutely amazing. Yeah. And well, since you ask, I am very close to having an expansion for this. So I'm super excited for that. And yeah, just across the board, people have told me that they've enjoyed the game. So that's meant the world.
Keep talking about that, because I'm just going to just reverse.
He's going to reverse. He's going to get an Uno out. We don't want to see an Uno. We don't want to see an Uno. He's going to get one of his books out again, I hope. Come on, he can do this. But yeah, if you do want to get the game, you can visit debunk.com. I think it's .com, not co.uk. And yeah, that'll be awesome to let me know what you think.
Sorry to bring up a competitors. I helped kickstart this game with just a small contribution, but this is called Trial by Trolley, and this
I
is
saw
a
this.
philosophical game. It's about the trolley experiment, and it is heaps of fun. It's a great multiplayer game, and you rotate your team, so you're just always on different teams, and it's just a really, like, if you love your philosophy and love a really good laugh, that is such a good game, but obviously not as good as your game. Buy Debunked first. Definitely buy Debunked. Buy several copies.
Oh, for sure. I believe that game that you just showed is by Happiness and Cyanide.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, they've been creating great content for a very long time, and they've had philosophical angles. So when they dropped that on Kickstarter, I've also got it. I was like, yeah, that looks really cool. So,
have you played it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. We'll have to do that then, Stephen. That'll be a pint and a game of, or no, play your game. Oh, sorry, how rude of me.
Yeah, it's very weird. When we play my game, I get to say no one beats me at my own game. It's cringe, but I get to say that, and then I normally lose anyway. So.
Do you get to change the rules just as you go? But this is in the expansion. I haven't quite brought out, but actually, I get to win this.
If you, there's going to be a new rule. I'm going to put it in. I'm not really, but you can say, look, it's called apologetic confidence. If you just state that the rules are a certain way and you do it confidently enough, then they are that way. That's just the way it works.
And just throwing the word objective, and then that's just the winner.
Yeah, here you go. Here's a card. The intellectual price tag of atheism. Boom! I'm having that.
Yeah, you go. What? So you would murder a baby? Really?
Oh, so it's not wrong to murder? Oh, for goodness sake!
Yes. So, anyone that's got any super chats or questions you want to get in, Stephen, please get them in now, because we're now starting to go on the home run to wrap things up, which is my quickfire round. And actually, I'm going to ask a couple of different ones I might normally ask because of actually your interest that you've shown there. But the first, let's go for the simple ones. This is so people can get to know you a little bit better in maybe ways that they wouldn't otherwise with your normal content. So, what's your favorite fiction book?
Bible. No.
Really?
let me think. Favorite fiction book.
I see who did that.
Ooh. It's probably Lord of the Rings. Quite like Lord of the Rings. Yeah,
classic.
I think I'm classic.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. Favorite non-fiction book?
Oh man, that's hard. Most of the stuff I read is science-based and stuff, so I actually don't read much of. Oh, damn.
But that's still non-fiction. I mean, what's a book
that
really changed my, my views, or that's really, it might not be your favorite book, but it's the most impactful? Or
I'd probably say with impact, it's God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens. It's not the best book I've read, so maybe I'm answering this wrong, but it set me on a journey, and while learning the book, I increased my vocabulary, and so that was a good laugh. I learned what it's like to read someone that's got an incredible style and way of expressing things. So I would say that God is Not Great is definitely high up there, but the most important. Oh, I might have to leave it in a comment afterwards. There's just so many that come to mind.
Well, the question was favourite. So I get,
God is Not Great. I'll go for that. It was just transformative for me.
Favourite movie?
It's recently been dethroned. My favourite movie for a very long time was The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. I think Tom Cruise put on a performance like I've never seen in my life. I think it's so well acted. I think that the character, Nathan Orgren, is brilliant. I love the concept. I know that it's been done before, but I just think The Last Samurai is just brilliant. It's so brilliant. However, recently watched 1917, and there's something about that film that is absolutely epic. It's terrifying when they go over the top into No Man's Land. It's those two films I'd say are my favorites. There's lots of others I could throw up there. Classic Shawshank Redemption. That's a very good film. But yeah, I'd probably say 1917.
Favorite TV series?
I really liked Spartacus. I thought Spartacus was really good. Game of Thrones was very good until like the last 2 seasons. The best is probably Breaking Bad. I think I know a lot of people go for that, but it is very, very good. It's really well acted. It's a really cool story. Season
Fair
1's a
call.
little bit weak, but yeah, that's definitely up there.
If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Ooh. I'd take Carl Pilkington's superpower off. He had this concept known as bullshit man. It's just like if he saw someone bullshit and he could just fly in and go bullshit. Like I think I'd take that power. Okay, a more serious answer would have to be...
I like that. I love that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just want. I've always wanted to just have a machine like in Quantum Leap. I remember watching that as a kid, and the bloke on it, not the main guy, but his matey that sent it back, had a machine, and that he could do stuff on. I always wanted a machine that could tell someone that they were categorically wrong, like about, which is kind of the same thing, which is like, I know you're wrong. Because in my head, like as a kid, I know you're wrong, and you're spinning me like some bullshit here, and I know that's wrong, but I can't prove that, and now everyone thinks you're right, and I know you're wrong. I want a machine to go, see, you're wrong, that kind of thing.
I put it in. The calculator says so.
Yeah. So what other superpower were you going to say? Sorry, I interrupted.
Probably reading minds would be pretty useful, because that way you would really understand where people are coming from. And often people, including myself, don't communicate themselves very well. But if you could read minds, you could really understand where they're coming from. The other thing is to be said of apologetics. I think a lot of it is performative, and you'd be able to tell immediately that this person knows something's crap and is doing this for X or Y reason. I know that's a negative view, but I don't understand how anyone could interact with apologetics for, say, as long as I have, and not come away with the view that some of it is at least just performative.
Yeah, I'd agree. If you were God, what would be the first thing you change about the world, or one thing you'd change?
Universalism. I'd make universalism a thing immediately, and I'd make it abundantly clear that that's the case.
I'd agree. I've long said, and I've had debates on universalism on this channel. Please check them out with Caleb Jackson and my friend Rob and Gnostic Informants. Where if I was a Christian, I'd believe in open theism, because I think divine foreknowledge is the biggest problem, and two, I'd be a universalist. But neither of those things actually themselves make any sense either. So, but they're better versions of Christianity than other types. Yeah. Favorite board game?
Oh, damn. I'm gonna have to just quickly Google this because I can't remember its name.
It means that much to you.
It's my favorite. Good. Okay. It's a game called Tekanoko, and it's about you've got a panda that moves across the board that eats bamboo, while you've got a farmer going around growing the bamboo, and just the game is just so well executed. It's a brilliant warm-up game for anyone, including people that don't know games very well, before you might move into, I don't know, Battle of Kiev. That's a really good game. Wow. Unfortunately, with Ukraine at the moment, it's a little bit, it's got other connotations to it, but it's a very good game.
I watch the YouTube channel Shut Up and Sit Down. Have you ever watched them? It's a board gaming channel. It's amazing.
I haven't. Yeah, I have seen like Dice Tower and things like that. Yeah, so I am aware of plenty of them.
Okay, so if you're just about to be executed for being a heathen, because we all know that is worthy of death. So you are granted a Last Supper, a favorite meal. What would your Last Supper be?
Probably I'd have holy water because it'd be symbolic. I'd probably have a Beyond Meat burger. Yeah, Beyond Meat burger. I'd probably go for that.
I had one tonight. Yeah. And
they're great.
I absolutely love. I mean, they're American, so it is annoying. But they're only £2.19 at the Tesco at the moment. So there you go. They're really Beyond good. Meat burgers are amazing. Yeah.
Have you? So like Harvester do a really good purist burger. Highly recommend it. It's an excellent burger. Starbucks at the moment in the south of the UK, at least, they've got a burger which is really, really good. KFC's burger is very good as well, which uses corn.
It's all right.
I'll have all of those burgers, please.
Yeah.
I'll eat all of those. I'll just have all the burgers, all the veggie burgers. Let's go.
All the good burgers. All the good burgers.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So you're just about to have your face eaten off by a horde of zombies. By the way, you can find these zombies. This is my spam again. Sorry.
Yeah.
I have great fiction books that are better than
cool.
Lord of the Rings. These are Survival of the Fittest and Metamorphosis, the Survival of the Fittest adaptation. They're dystopian, set in Britain, but they're universally exciting. You're just about to get your face eaten off by a horde of zombies. So you just get time to run into your prepped up bunker. You can take 3 people with you. They can't be your friends or family. What 3?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So many interesting questions. First of all, you're going to have to give me tips on how to be so prolific with your writing. I'm well impressed. I'm jealous.
I've got about 16 books, I think. But
that's you got to give me tips, honestly. So you're going to do that privately. Who would I bring into the bunker? And I'm about to get my head bit off by zombies, right?
Yeah. You've got a month. You've got a month in the bunker.
I would probably bring Andrew Loke and Joe Schmid because it would be really funny to watch them argue. It would just bring so much joy to me. I'd find it very funny, and it'd be great.
Big bucket of popcorn.
the biggest popcorn. I'd love it.
And who else?
It would be Joe Schmid and Ed Fazer because that would be also hilarious.
I'd like to see that. Who else then? A third.
Okay. Sorry, Stephen Fry, but I'd probably bring him along. It'd be good company.
Right. Okay. Interesting mix of people. I like that. So what are you now sort of that brings to a close? By the way, thank you, Paul Cherry says, and thank you so much for your contribution. It really does allow me to keep doing this. Like, if I didn't, my partner just wouldn't let me do this. Like, if you weren't so generous. So thank you. My superpower would be probability manipulations. That would be handy if I took a trip to Las Vegas. Right. Okay. Interesting. Yes. I'm sure there's slightly easier ways to just like, if I could willingly turn stuff to money, maybe that's slightly easier than like manipulate probability. Although that could have interesting. I wonder. It's like I'm going to jump off this bridge into the water like 100 feet below, and I will survive. I'll be able to switch the probability. Yeah, I don't know.
That's anyway. True. That could be applicable to everything. It's a good power.
Yeah,
I'm having it. It's mine now.
Co-opted. Nice one. Thanks, Paul Cherry. That's really cool. So what have I done? I've just done something funky. So how can people find you? And do you want people to find you?
Yeah, you can find me. Come find me. You can find me on the channel Rationality Rules, or you can find me on Casually Debunked, or you can find me on Low Fruit, or you can find me on various. I think there are 3 ones that are my platform. So check those out. Probably start with Rationality Rules. So yeah, thank you.
This is where I've gone wrong. So thank you. I was just panicking there because I've pressed buttons and I've deleted things and done stuff that I don't know what I've done. But Abel Medina, Stephen, you have to get on the Atheist Experience again. I have seen you on there. You get around. So this is obviously you go over to America. You've done that. Have you enjoyed that? Was that quite nerve-wracking?
It was incredible because I really enjoyed the Atheist Experience. Like Tracy Harris, she made a really big impact on me and the way that I think. So it was really cool to go across and see it. Unfortunately, it correlated with the whole trans kerfuffle thing, and Tracy hates my guts. She's made that clear publicly. But I did get the opportunity to go on the Atheist Experience, and it ended brilliantly. It was really cool to have that experience, and I would do it again. So yeah, and I'm also heading out to the US probably at the beginning of November. So I'll probably look for collaborations there, and if that's on the table, I'd do it.
So that was going to be my final question, which is, what are your next projects? What are you interested in? What kind of arguments are you interested in for your own channel? But also, what things have you got lined up?
Oh, there's a lot of projects. So a couple of them that come to mind is I am going to start doing a Q&As from patrons, particularly for Casually Debunked, where I can just give more thought to answers because these people pay me money and they keep the lights on. So I'm going to be providing the best answers I can to some really interesting questions, many of which similar to some that you've expressed tonight. So that's one thing. And then on Rationality Rules, I'm looking to bump the production, and I'm looking to move into areas that aren't strictly religious but close to it. So I'm probably going to make a video on abortion and the various views on that. I'm probably going to make a video related to Platonic forms. Make a video related to veganism again. This time I'll express what I think is the best argument for veganism, because I expressed recently why I don't think the main argument that seems to be presented works. So I'm going to give what I think is actually the best argument. And yeah, there's lots of projects. They're just half-baked. And of course, I'm going to be continuing my series with Joe Schmidt.
Do you, and I'm sorry, you just make me want to ask more questions. So do you think like for you as well personally, but in general, people, like sometimes I think I've written 4,500, maybe about 4,600 or 700 now, articles and blog posts over my time. I've written at least a dozen books on religion. I've got 4 in the works at the moment. I think sometimes I've said all I can say, or I've got to a point where actually other things interest me as much as these things have done. So for you, is that what you just said there about wanting to branch out? Is that as much as to say that actually there are other things that now interest me more, or I've now just got a platform that allows me to say these things that I've always felt and I think is important? I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It's part and part. So yes, on the one side, I've thought about certain things for a very long time, say religion, and I've said essentially all the views I want to say. I am changing in my views slightly, but really what's said has been said, and I'm just going to move forward. And that means applying what I've learned in other realms, such as politics, maybe, or like these other areas of philosophy, such as to do with abortion. So yes, that's correct. However, I didn't realize this until I made a video on him, and that's Voltaire, right? Was it Francois-Marie Arouet? I realized when I studied him that he's actually the hero I was looking for a long time. Him and Hume. Hume gives you the philosophy. Voltaire gives you the weaving of the philosophy or the science or whatever it may be into poetry. And that's not going anywhere because apologists exist and they are messing up and misrepresenting things all the damn time. And so there's just, as far as I see it, there's always a need to unravel these things and help people recognize where they've sneaked in certain things or where they've overstated their case. And that's what I see Voltaire is really embodying with like what he did with the works of Newton. And I think that that's never going to stop. So in that sense, no, I see no stopping on the horizon for those kind of responses, for that kind of material.
Interesting. Thank you, Stephen. Great show from Logan Fisher. Great to see you on here, Lord Rules. And thanks again to Abel and all the people who have contributed to the show. It's been really, really great to speak to Steve and I really appreciate all the support that you guys have given and the very much the lively chat that's been going on the side, including someone saying, "What the hell is going on here? Am I watching the Office but with no payout?" I think he's just come along at the end where we're talking about the quickfire questions, and it's like, what the hell is going on here? I thought you were supposed to be talking about philosophy and religion, and he's talking about zombies. Anyway, Stephen, look, thank you so much. Is there any sort of last words you want to say?
The pleasure's been all mine. Thank you for everything that you've done, the books that you've written, the articles that you've written, the splashes that you've made in the greater pond that we're all swimming in. You're the kind of person that doesn't get the gratitude that you probably deserve. So just from one ape to another, thanks for everything you do.
Oh, mate, I genuinely just got a shiver. I don't know whether you truly meant that. I hope you do.
I do.
And thank you. And for you even more so. I mean, the ripples you make, I may make ripples, you make waves. So obviously keep it up. And you've got a great thirst for doing a great deal of excellent work. So thank you, and thank you for agreeing to come on here. But for everyone else, thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and all the things I hear proper YouTubers say, like do all of them. Lots. And if you have the ability, you can always join the channel or give thanks or whatever, buy us a coffee. But I feel bad saying that because it's all like whatever. I just feel uncomfortable. But do whatever you like, or just forget that you've ever watched this and never come back again. In the meantime, look, thanks to all. Take care and pop back on a future interview. There's usually one a week. Anyway, any case, thank you so much, Stephen. You take care. Big love to you, and toodle pips.